It happened on the same evening that Elena's latest artwork went for a ridiculous amount of money. During the press interaction, a curious reporter asked her if the man depicted in the painting was her fiancé, Mark Sterling. She simply offered a polite smile and corrected him, stating that Mark and she were strictly friends. I didn't hesitate. I immediately flashed the silver band on my ring finger and agreed with her. I told the press that of course we were just friends, considering I was already a married man. Later that night, everyone witnessed Elena, who had been glowing with pride just moments prior, suddenly break down in tears. The new masterpiece from the acclaimed painter, Elena, titled The Sanctuary, had just sold for a sum in the 9 figures. At the gala held to celebrate the sale, that nosy reporter had cornered her. He asked about the semi-nude figure of a man in the painting, wondering if it was me. People in the crowd started joking along, asking who else it could possibly be, since everyone in New York knew that for the last 8 years, I was the only muse Elena ever used. We were considered the model couple of the art world, devoted to one another. I had been with her from the days when she was a nobody until she achieved this massive success. The general consensus was that very few men would spend 8 years helping a woman find herself. They weren't wrong about the history. Elena and I met when we were 18. 8 years ago, we were the 2 most promising students under our mentor, Professor Hawthorne. Then, a fire changed the trajectory of our lives. My hand was crushed in the chaos, leaving my bones and tendons permanently damaged. I realized I would never be able to hold a paintbrush properly again. With no other option, I gave up my own artistic ambitions and became the man standing behind Elena, supporting her. With her raw talent and relentless work ethic, she climbed higher in the industry every day. By the time she was 20, she had won first prize in a world-class competition. In the few years that followed, she swept nearly every major international award. Her fame skyrocketed, and she reached the pinnacle she had always dreamed of. Thinking about all of this, I subconsciously tightened my grip on my wine glass. The reporter who had asked the initial question now wore an expression that suggested he lived for this kind of drama. He mentioned a rumor that I was planning to propose to her right there at the gala and asked if it was true. At that exact moment, a spotlight swung around and hit me in the face. Someone in the crowd started chanting for me to propose, and soon others joined in, yelling, "Marry her!" Before I could even open my mouth, Elena cleared her throat on stage. The spotlight swung back to her. She tapped her fingers on the podium and laughed softly, apologizing to the crowd. She explained that Mark and she were just business partners at the studio and nothing more. She stated clearly that I wasn't her fiancé, and the man in the painting wasn't me. As soon as she finished speaking, a hush fell over the room. All eyes turned back to me. I saw confusion, pity, and knowing glances. Elena's gaze swept over me from the stage. It felt mocking, almost cruel, as if seeing me humiliated gave her some sort of satisfaction. But I was about to disappoint her. I looked up and gave a bright smile. Flashing the conspicuous ring on my left ring finger, I playfully told the crowd that the great painter's fiancé certainly wasn't me, because I was already spoken for. That was the moment everyone saw Elena lose her composure. Exactly 1 year prior, on December 24th, it had been my birthday. Elena had promised for a long time that she would spend it with me, but she was nowhere to be found. I called her 16 times, but she didn't pick up once. I waited until midnight. The clock struck 12, and in the profound silence of the apartment, my birthday passed. I lit a candle for myself and watched the flame flicker, my mind drifting back 8 years to this very day. I remembered a cool, reserved girl holding out a cake she had baked herself. Her face flushed as she asked me to give her 8 years. She had promised that in 8 years, she would marry me. The candlelight from that memory cast a warm glow. But in the present, I blew out the candle in front of me and silently ate the cake alone. The frosting felt bitter and tasteless on my tongue. At 1 a.m, I finally received a message from her. She texted a brief apology, saying she was busy and asking if we could celebrate tomorrow. She signed it Mark, which made me chuckle. It felt so distant. She used to call me by nicknames, and when we were intimate, she'd whisper my name over and over. But she never just called me Mark like that. I didn't sleep at all that night, and she didn't come home. When I woke up, I habitually scrolled through my social media feed. A familiar profile picture caught my eye, and my breath hitched. The timestamp was 1:30 a.m. It was a post from Julian. It read, "10 years, I'm finally back. Things have changed, but I'm glad someone was still willing to wait for me." The attached photo showed a woman's back wearing a black trench coat. It was a new fall-season Burberry coat that I had picked out for Elena myself. The next day, Elena had to attend an important gallery exhibition. The event started at 2, but I didn't see her at the entrance until 4. She had dark circles under her eyes, her hair was a mess, and even the collar of her pantsuit was crooked. The organizers were furious. They couldn't accept the guest of honor being 2 hours late. I apologized profusely to everyone, practically bowing and scraping to smooth things over. They only calmed down after I offered to compensate them with 2 of Elena's new paintings. Tranta. When I finally got a moment with her, Elena stood before me with her head down like a child who had done something wrong. She apologized, saying it was her fault. I got straight to the point and asked where she had been the night before. A flicker of panic crossed her eyes. She explained that she went to pick up Julian because he had just returned to the country. She reminded me that he didn't have any family here, and she was the only one he knew. She claimed she hadn't wanted to go, but he called 10 times, so she had to. She said she took him to his hotel and then spent the rest of the night at the studio. It was like watching a child getting caught. She rambled, making up excuses and spewing useless details. The more she explained, the more she was trying to hide. It was a classic tell. Her face was flushed. And she was talking a mile a minute. I knew her well enough to know she was only half lying. She probably did go to the studio later that night, but not until 4 a.m. I straightened her collar and told her she could have just told me the truth. She grabbed my hand, saying she was afraid I'd be angry. I asked why I would be angry, considering he was her brother. Technically, life can be a real soap opera. Julian was her stepbrother. Years ago, Elena's mother and Julian's father got together, each bringing a child into their new blended family. 10 years ago, Julian had chased love across the ocean, throwing everything away for it. In the end, he lost it all. His ex-girlfriend, Chloe, cheated on him when his career hit rock bottom, took all his money, and even got full custody of their child. With no other choice, he came back home in disgrace. Just like Elena said, he had nothing left. She suggested that since Julian hadn't found a job yet and used to study painting with us, we should let him work part-time at our studio until he found something permanent. After she spoke, she gently hugged me, her warm breath on my neck, asking me to trust her. She promised that once she got Julian settled, she had a surprise for me. I wanted to say no, but before I could get the words out, Julian appeared in the studio doorway. He was still handsome, charming even. Time hadn't left a mark on him. It always seems to favor the beautiful. He wasn't even trying, but in a simple white shirt, he was enough to turn heads. He greeted me with a, "Long time no see, Mark." The curve of his smile was perfect, accentuating the small beauty mark under his eye. It was a warm, disarming smile, the kind that makes it hard to say no. But I said no anyway. I pointed out that with Elena's income and fame, she could support 10 of him for the rest of his life, even if he never worked a day. Julian's handsome face stiffened. He insisted that a man had to have his own career, because if he was dependent on a woman, she'd dump him the second he was no longer useful. The thought of what he'd been through abroad must have hit him because his eyes welled up and his voice cracked. Elena, standing next to him, frowned and quickly comforted him, promising she would never abandon him. I fell silent, watching this touching display of sibling affection, but our studio really didn't need any more staff. I politely refused, citing that we weren't hiring, but promised to pull some strings to find him a good job elsewhere. But the next day, I saw Julian at the studio anyway. He was wearing a slim-fit shirt and slacks that highlighted his athletic build, broad shoulders, and a narrow waist. His short dark hair was slightly damp. He was posing quietly in the middle of the studio while my students gathered around him, sketching his portrait. My assistant, Ben, ran over to me frowning. He told me that this guy showed up first thing in the morning and he couldn't stop him. Julian had bought gifts and snacks for the kids and had them wrapped around his finger. Ben noted that Julian really knew how to charm people. He heard today was our life drawing class and just sat down to let them draw him. Ben said he was like a ghost you couldn't get rid of. I was confused and asked why Ben didn't like him. Ben's brow furrowed. He told me there was something off about Julian and warned me to be careful. He said Julian was like this years ago too. He loved being the center of attention and having everyone orbit around him. He used to be incredibly talented, but slowly lost his passion for painting because he found it boring and tedious. He hated getting his hands dirty and preferred to spend his days dressed impeccably, sitting in the middle of the studio for hours. He loved the feeling of all eyes being on him. Ben noted that no matter how much talent you have, if you don't work at it, the universe takes it back piece by piece. Eventually, Julian's talent faded into mediocrity. He fell in love with the glittering, superficial world and didn't even wait to graduate from college before running off with some rich girl he met online. That was 10 years ago. The kids at the studio loved him. After class, they crowded around me, begging to have Julian be the model for their next portrait class. Ben leaned in and scolded them, saying they couldn't call him Julian. They had to call him Mr. Julian or Uncle Julian. Across the room, I saw Julian's face darken. I had to admit, Julian's strategy of winning everyone over first and asking for permission later was effective. He successfully landed a job as a life drawing model at the studio. He told me not to worry, that he wouldn't be a bother for long, just give him a month to find a job he liked. But a month later, things took a turn. That day, New York saw its first snow of the season. One of Elena's paintings from 6 months prior had sold for a good price, and the studio was throwing a party to celebrate. The dinner was held at an exclusive club. But the moment the waiters came out, we were all stunned. Julian stood out among the servers. He was wearing a uniform, his ears and the tip of his nose red from the cold. One of our colleagues recognized him and asked what he was doing waiting tables there. Julian froze. His eyes turned red and he bit his lip, stammering without getting a full sentence out. His facade of stoicism was heart-wrenching. Suddenly, he stumbled, twisting his ankle. He lost his grip on the tray, and a tureen of hot soup was about to spill all over his legs. Elena bolted from her seat. She threw her own arm out to block the soup. The hot liquid splashed all over her forearm and her hand, the hand that painted a picture that just sold for $8 million. The truth is that soup wouldn't have landed on Julian's legs. It was tilting to the left and would have spilled onto the floor, but Elena panicked. Maybe she was just that worried about him. She didn't even think about her own hand. She had a major international art conference the next day, and I was worried an injury would affect her. I rushed to get some ice for her arm. Elena's face was grim, and she didn't say a word. I looked at the burn and breathed a sigh of relief. The soup wasn't too hot, so it should be fine. Julian stood nearby, his eyes red with distress, apologizing and blaming himself. I told him it was okay and not serious, trying to calm him down. But Elena suddenly yanked her arm away from me. She stood up, gently wiped a tear from the corner of Julian's eye, and pulled him into a hug right in front of me, comforting him. The next second, she turned to me, her gaze icy, as if she didn't know me. In front of the entire studio, she accused me of only caring about the money. She asked if I was afraid her hand wouldn't be able to paint anymore. She yelled that a whole bowl of soup spilled, and I didn't even ask if Julian's legs were okay. She claimed that if I hadn't forced Julian out, he wouldn't be freezing working in a place like this, and she wouldn't have gotten burned. She asked if the money she made wasn't enough, and why I couldn't make room for one person. I was speechless. Later, Elena stood in the snow all night, begging for my forgiveness. She said she was just overwrought because he was her brother, and she only said those hurtful things in the heat of the moment. I laughed coldly and asked if she really thought he was there to be a waiter. Elena looked at me, baffled. I told her I asked the club manager, and Julian had started that very day because he knew we were having our party there. He went there to put on a show. Elena cut me off, screaming that was enough. A vein throbbed in her temple as she glared at me. She clenched her fist so tightly that the burn on her left hand started to bleed, drops of red falling onto the snow. She had never been so harsh with me before. The Elena I knew always spoke in a soft, gentle voice. For the first time, because of another man, she was screaming at me, saying she wouldn't let me talk about Julian like that. It was then that it dawned on me. Ever since Julian had returned, Elena had never once called him brother to his face. Elena and I gave each other the silent treatment for a while, but I still had to go to the studio every day. We had built it from the ground up. After I could no longer paint, I poured all my energy into it. It was like my child. Every little piece of it was my heart and soul. Julian was still at the studio doing what he loved most. Only now, he wasn't just a model for the students. He had become Elena's model too. I can't remember exactly when he started appearing in her paintings, or maybe he had never left them in the first place. Elena used to love painting me. She would run her fingers through my hair, trace the lines of my face, and tell me I was perfect art. Almost every one of her paintings had the shadow of a young man in it, and she said it was me. I was naive enough to believe her. Thinking about it now, I had to laugh. I was just a stand-in all along. I broke up with Elena for good 6 months ago. That day, I pushed open the studio door. In the glow of the setting sun, Julian was leaning back on the sofa, half naked. His eyes were half open, looking blissful. His messy black hair was stuck to his skin. Beneath the strands of hair, I could see dark red marks running down his neck. Elena stood there, paintbrush in hand, capturing the scene on canvas. When they saw me, they both panicked. Elena started saying it wasn't what I thought and tried to explain. In her haste, she knocked over a can of paint. White paint spilled everywhere. Mixed in with the pure white was a sticky, yellowish fluid, and a foul smell hit me, making me feel sick. It was disgusting. I stormed out. Elena rushed out to block my path, claiming it wasn't what it looked like. My heart was dead. The woman I had loved for 8 years. The woman who had once risked everything to pull me from a fire had become this. I laughed coldly and asked for the truth. I told her not to say she was sacrificing herself for art, and screamed that he was her brother. Seeing me like this, Elena was terrified. She stammered that Julian wasn't her brother and never was. She apologized, saying she had been racking her brain for her entry for the Lukey Prize and couldn't think of anything. She said the theme was frenzy, destruction, and rebirth. I cut her off, asking if that meant doing sordid things with him and mixing filth into the paint. She froze. I looked into her eyes and sneered, telling her to wake up because the person who needed a rebirth was me. I pushed past her, shaking uncontrollably. As I left, I heard Julian whisper comfortingly in her ear, telling her she was amazing and that I didn't understand art. He said I had done nothing but take from her like a leech. He scoffed at me, telling Elena that to the dirty-minded, everything looks dirty. Elena and I were done. I used the studio's security footage as leverage to ensure she left with nothing. There was no way I was handing the studio over to her. She asked if I was sure, suggesting we could continue as partners since Aura Studios only had its reputation because of her. I didn't even look up and told her to pack, because the cleaning crew was coming to disinfect the place. She flew into a rage, yelling that without her I was nothing. She pulled up my sleeve to reveal the scar on my arm, calling me a cripple who couldn't hold a paintbrush. Julian came up behind her, dripping with sarcasm, calling me an ungrateful cripple. Asta, he said if they had known, she should have just let me burn to death in that fire years ago with my biased mentor. I didn't hesitate. I swung my hand and slapped Julian hard across the face. 6 years ago, Elena and I were students under Professor Hawthorne, the best teacher in the world. That day we stayed late to finish our competition pieces. He said I had a real shot at first place, but that night, a fire broke out. It took him and my artwork. I was trapped, and right before I passed out, I saw Elena running in to save me. I survived, but my right hand was badly burned, damaging the nerves and bones. I could no longer create the art I wanted. Our mentor died, and I stepped into the background to co-found Aura Art Studios with Elena. The slap stunned Julian. When he recovered, he glared at me and raised his hand to strike back. Just then, a slender hand grabbed his wrist and pushed him back. A familiar voice asked who gave him permission to hit her person in front of her studio. I looked up to see Sophie Lin, Aura's biggest investor. Sophie was the daughter of the richest man in New York, known as a cool, aloof heiress. Her father had funded the studio in hopes she would gain some artistic sensibility. Seeing it was Sophie, Elena held back Julian, knowing her upcoming auction depended on the Lin family's support. But Julian couldn't let it go. He smoothed his hair and was about to insult me when one of the studio kids bit him on the thigh. A dozen more students ran out, pushing Julian and Elena away. Julian's face turned pale with rage as he yelled that I was nothing without them. Sophie handed me a wet wipe, telling me to clean my hand because looking at him made her feel dirty. She watched Elena leave and sighed, calling it tragic that my girlfriend ran off with another man. I told Miss Lin she had lipstick on her teeth. I always knew Elena had a thing for Julian. He was the best-looking guy in our group, the object of many crushes. I thought after he left, her crush would have ended. When she saved me from the fire, I thought he was gone from her heart. She never seemed repulsed by my scars. Sometimes she would draw designs around them. I thought she only loved me. Not long after they moved out, the ownership shares of Aura were redistributed. I still owned my 30%. Elena had originally promised to give me her shares, but she went back on her word. She wanted me to buy her out for $50 million. She threatened to release the video, and I threw, asking if it would destroy her or the studio. She texted saying she didn't know what was wrong with me, claiming nothing happened between her and Julian, and it was all for art. She thought I would understand. I typed back that I would buy her shares. She asked where I would get the money. I replied with a poop emoji and blocked her. I went to Julian's post about new life, replied with 2 poop emojis, and blocked him too. I didn't have the money, but Sophie did. That night I knocked on the Lin family's door. Sophie looked at me strangely and held the door half closed. I pushed past her and told her I could teach her how to paint, but she had to do one thing for me. She asked if I was making deals now. I turned on the light in her study. An easel stood there with an egg on the table and a rough outline on the canvas. I asked if she was practicing Da Vinci eggs. Her family had high hopes for her art, but Sophie was a black hole for talent. She had scared off countless tutors. Her grandfather had asked me years ago, but I declined. I never imagined she would still be stuck drawing eggs. She asked about my hand. I flexed my fingers and picked up a pencil with dexterity, sketching the egg in moments. Sophie was stunned. For 6 years, in the dead of night, I had secretly practiced. I endured the pain, sketching lines one at a time. The scars would tear and heal over and over until I could complete a painting. It wasn't perfect, but I was satisfied. Sophie fronted the money to buy Elena's stake. From that day on, Elena had nothing to do with Aura Studios. Life fell into a routine. I ran the studio and taught Sophie every week. Elena's face still graced magazines, now with Julian by her side. She opened a new studio called Evanesque Studios. Ben rolled his eyes at the name. Soon, we ran into each other at a New York art conference. I had included one of my own secret paintings in the exhibit. The theme was life. Elena painted a tree. I also painted a tree. They were placed side by side. People praised Elena's lifelike pine tree. Julian sneered at my painting, a ginkgo tree full of yellow leaves, calling it decay rather than life. He mocked the roots I had painted and said the studio shouldn't have bothered showing up. He didn't know I was the artist. Elena presented the awards. She froze when she opened the envelope. She announced the first prize went to Aura Art Studios for the ginkgo. Julian was shocked and claimed it was impossible. One of the judges stood up and explained that while the leaves showed decay, the roots showed a tenacious will to live, fitting the theme perfectly. The room applauded, but Julian shouted that the painting was a fake. He claimed the style was Professor Hawthorne's and accused it of being a forgery. Everyone looked at me with suspicion. Elena stood silently, refusing to clear my name. Just then, Sophie arrived with her grandfather. She led him to my painting. He studied it, put on his glasses, and teared up. He confirmed it was Hawthorne's style, and realized it was me. He lamented the fire. Julian muttered, asking, "So what if I studied under him?" Ben quipped back, "I knew Sophie brought her grandfather to back me up." That night, I went to thank her, but she handed me a file about the fire from years ago. It was labeled arson. I told her the investigation ruled it an accident caused by kids. She asked why kids were playing with matches right under my studio and who gave them the matches. She showed me photos and said it was her gift to me. She asked for one more favor. We returned to the day of the auction where the reporter asked about the proposal. Elena smiled and denied I was her fiancé. I flashed the ring and said I was spoken for. Sophie stood up and linked her arm with mine, asking since when her husband was someone else's fiancé. Elena was flustered. Julian walked onto the stage, kissed Elena, and claimed to be her fiancé. I applauded and offered them a wedding gift. I presented the files to the head of the auction house. The file proved Elena committed manslaughter. Well, she had dropped a box of matches by the door for the kids to find. She had thrown away drawings of fire-breathing monsters to inspire them. She just wanted to burn my competition piece because she heard I might win. She never meant for people to die, which is why she saved me. The police found she had bought 10 boxes of matches, and only one remained. It was her 9th attempt that worked. Julian saw the evidence and let go of her hand. Elena looked at me with hatred and sorrow. The auction house then declared her painting The Sanctuary a copy. She had been copying Hawthorne's hidden works for years. The auction was voided, and she faced fines. Julian tried to run, claiming he didn't know her well. I stopped him and showed evidence of his money laundering through the auction. The crowd dispersed. I sat back down, exhausted. Sophie sat next to me. I took off the fake ring and thanked her. She laughed, took the ring, and put a real one on my finger, whispering that her grandfather said the family heirloom could only be worn by his grandson-in-law.